guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
Welcome back to the Clubmobile, everybody. We're so happy to have you joining us once again.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming back.
Hello.
Joining us this morning, we're so excited to have you with us, is Eloise-Marie Loeffler, and she is the daughter of WASP pilot Marie Mountain Clark and 100th Bomb Group pilot John Clark. Eloise, thank you so much for being here. I got all excited to talk about your mom. I called you Marie. I'm so sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you ladies.
Well, we're so thrilled to have you hanging out with us this morning.
For those of you that don't know or haven't read Marie's book, which you should have done because it was in our previous book club quarter, Eloise, could you give us a short rundown on your mother and how she came to be with the WASP?
Well, Mom was a pilot. You know, all the WASP were pilots before they joined the WASP because they had to, of course, qualify. And that was kind of rule number one. You had to be a pilot. She was very interested in air flight, as was Dad. Dad always described it as the air-minded generation because they would see planes, both of them, flying over and be very curious. Mom lived near an airport. Dad lived near an airport, so they saw a lot of planes. So she went and got her Civil Air Patrol training, and was flying since she was about, well, she was 31 when she met Dad. So, and in the WASP, she was 29 to 30. So she was probably early 20s when she was able to get out of high school and be able to work and get her license. So she was flying private planes and then heard about the WASP and immediately wrote to join them and was fortunate to qualify. And so she just loved it. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yes.
There's something, having read your mother's book, there's something so familiar about her in the way that she presents herself in her letters and in her growing up. And I think it's because, you can really see that your mom was so close to her family before leaving to join the WASP. And that her parents and her sister were so supportive of her in both her flying career and her professional musician career that reading the letters, you almost feel like you're sitting in a barrack with your mom, kind of talking to her. Those letters they're not like, sometimes you read a letter and it's kind of got like a clinical feel to it. And there's something so like just warm and fuzzy about your mom and friendly, and you want to read more of them and you want to be Marie's friend is basically how I came away from the book. So I was like, I would have been Marie's friend. I would have wanted to be her friend. Yeah. Absolutely.
Neat perspective. I appreciate that. Yeah, she was. Her family was extremely supportive of whatever she and her sister did. And then they were all very proud of each other. And, there was no jealousy. And Mom had so much attention because she was such an incredible musician, as was her sister, actually. But Mom seemed to get most of the attention. And she was the older daughter. But then, of course, her whole WASP experience, they were very supportive of that. And they always wanted to know incredible details about, they were so interested in their children and each other and other people. Grandpa and Grandma were very much like that. They had millions of friends and honestly very interested in other people. And they were our Iowa dairy farmers, but very sophisticated people. And they were just so proud of Mom and her sister Eloise. And so, in other words, so that explains why her letters were so detailed. And they were interested in every single thing. So those letters are interesting, aren't they? Because it gives so much detail of her training and of the plane and of the other girls and where they lived and everything.
I always love going back and reading a few of my favorites that for some reason my favorites are always the mom, dad, can you send me this dress? It's the third from the left in my closet. Or I really want this record to play to my new friends. It's the fifth one in this second pile. And there's one that Gabby and I always talk about where it's at the end, she says, "This is a really silly letter." I think it's something like that where she
Oh
says,
my God,
"Isn't
yeah.
this funny?"
This is such a silly letter. I'm so sleepy. Good night.
And then and I love how she always signs off with taps at the end, and it's then she says, "I'll write next time." It was very sweet. How did
Yeah.
she fit the music into um being a pilot also? Did she prefer one to the other, or was she very much equally involved with both?
Well, yeah, very equally involved. They're very similar things, with music, and I came out of a professional music uh, world career in New York, and then went to medical school. And and it's the same thing with mom. I'm coming back to mom, but it's the same thing where it's easy to switch careers like that, or any career where everything is expected of you. And so with her music, everything is expected of you. You have to think on your feet. You can't make a mistake. If you do, you have to sort of cover it up the best you can. Um, just that attention to detail, hard work, practice, consistent discipline. It's the same thing with medicine. I can only speak about medicine, where you just have to, you can't make a mistake. And everything is expected of you, and you expect everything of yourself. So, in other words, for her to go from music to, she can't make a mistake in her pilot career. And of course, she only flew after the WASP. She didn't fly, and I asked her about that several times, and I didn't understand it until quite recently. I think when I started going to her reunions, her WASP reunions, and Dad's 100th Bomb Group reunions, that she didn't want to fly a Cessna after flying. A P-39 or something, or a B-17. I mean, the power. She always talked about the power of a military aircraft. And I never really understood that until I saw those planes up close and personal and rode in them.
Yeah.
So, in other words, she really was a very trained lady, and her music, she practiced a lot when she was in Sweetwater in the WASP too. She kept practicing, and she was still performing. There was a church there that wanted her to play a whole lot, and I only know that from her book, like you do. And but she played a lot. And people liked it. I would be too embarrassed to play. I would never have taken my violin down there and played. But somehow she didn't mind playing her flute in public.
Did she carried on playing music
Yeah.
post-war? Am I right? Yeah,
Yes.
and she carried
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that career.
Yeah. She kept going. After the war, my parents went back to University of Michigan, where Dad was from, actually,
Yeah.
and then they were in Boston then for many years. After that, Dad got his master's and his PhD. They call it an SCD at MIT, and then Dad stayed on for another 10 years and taught at MIT. And so she was playing in Boston that whole time. She had some chamber music groups that she played with, and she also toured with them. She did a lot of orchestral work, a lot of solo work. And she was extremely talented, a gifted woman, really in
Absolutely,
anything
she
she
was.
touched. I remember one time when I was in high school, she showed me a report. I probably found it. She would never have shown it, pulled it out of a box and showed it to me. A thing on Hamlet or Macbeth, I don't remember. And she'd cut out this cover for it that was so detailed. It was kind of a yellow construction paper and a forest green construction paper, and almost like she had a penknife and or an X-Acto knife and cut out a, a mask, really, of one of either Hamlet or Macbeth's head. It's unbelievable. And the detail. And then there was nothing she did that wasn't excellent. So, of
Yeah.
course, we had to pretend to follow suit.
I'm sure you did. I'm absolutely sure that
But
you did.
I have no doubt that you guys did.
Right. Exactly.
There's even a bit in the book where she writes about taking classes at Sweetwater. They didn't just fly all the time. They would take ground school classes, and they would learn weather reports and they would do math, where she gets a 98 or a 99 on an exam, and she writes to your grandparents and she says, well, guess I'm not perfect anymore.
Yes.
It's like, she's so funny.
Yeah, we spent most of our time.
I said, she's
we spent most of our time
adorable.
giggling. There's a reason we've read it multiple times at this point.
Yes.
Because we just go back and it's so comforting all the time.
It's interesting your take on the book, because her personality, actually, she's a very quiet person and very dignified and would never ever brag. So it's funny that the take that in the letters, I know what you're talking about because of course I've read it too. But you get a really different sense of her personality, and I wondered, did she change as she aged? Or did she change when she got married? She had to play the role of a wife. I mean, you'd never know that she did all this stuff. That's a very different woman than I ever knew, honestly. And Dad was Dad all the way through, and was very proud of his service. And Mom was very proud of her service and was very willing to serve. Like all those women, as soon as they heard that the WASP was starting, they wrote immediately, I'm sure. And we're all excited about that. And I'm sure if they didn't qualify, they were very disappointed. But Mom, just everything she did was so excellent. Of course she was going to qualify. And I don't know that she knew that, but.
Was your mother always very outward in sharing with you her time in the WASP, or was it a case of your dad would say something and she would follow suit with her own experiences?
You had to beg her to talk to her. Well, that's a little strong, but you had to bring up the topic of the WASP. She would never necessarily bring it up herself unless it was appropriate. But Dad talked about his stuff so much, I think she didn't feel like she had to talk about hers. But that was also her personality. She wasn't going to put herself forward like that.
Yeah. Right.
Which from reading her letters, you wouldn't think that, because she was so giving all that information in the letters. She was very different when I knew her. And I think she was just letting Dad have the show, a good, 50s wife, 40s and 50s wife.
Yeah, it does beg the question of what were our parents like before we came along, right?
Oh yeah. What
I think
they were people,
very,
right? I guess we forget that they're not just mom and dad. They were people before they were mom and dad. And I hear stories of my parents, they met in college, and I'm like, mom? Really? Mom? Really? It's not the lady I know.
And do we grow out of those? Yeah, do we grow out of those things, or do we change because of our kids? You have to be a role model as a kid. As a mom, I don't know. But I really can't. What I know of my mom, I can't imagine her flying a plane, and that's a little strong. But I can, in terms of her qualities and what she expected of herself, which was everything, and what she wanted to do. She was a very courageous person. And I didn't see that upfront kind of stuff like that, but she was never afraid of anything. And which is probably why she was a better performer on her flute than I was on the violin. But she was a very interesting person. But if people would ask her about it, she would certainly talk. And when she got with other WASP, oh my gosh, they would never shut up. It was very interesting. It's like the guys when they get together, that's what they talk about. For the 100th Bomb Group, it's very interesting to listen. Yeah, very, very interesting.
You mentioned,
but she was a beautiful woman inside and out. Say again.
I was going to say, you mentioned that mom never flew after the war. She just couldn't bring herself to fly. Just a small little Cessna.
Yeah,
it was like
they are tiny.
They are tiny.
And a toy, like a
they
toy
look like
compared
toy
to what she
planes
had
compared to some of the planes that these women flew, which was incredible.
Yeah.
Did your dad ever fly after the war as well? I mean, obviously he made a career of teaching and had his master's and his PhD, but did he make time sometimes to fly?
Yeah, he flew in the National Guard afterwards. So he had the opportunities to fly the military aircraft and took that opportunity and probably was getting paid and they needed the money desperately. They were students for the National Guard. And so the Michigan National Guard. And so he would fly. But once they were in Boston, I don't believe Dad flew because they were in Ann Arbor, Michigan for 3 years before they went to Boston because Dad had to finish his undergrad degree
Right.
on the GI Bill. But I don't believe he flew once they were in Boston. I may be wrong about that, but not very long if he did in Boston. But I know he flew for like 3 years for the Michigan National Guard and flew around a lot, like all by himself in these big, huge planes. There was no co-pilot or navigator or anything. He just took the plane up. It's kind of shocking to me.
It's a
That must have
different
been
generation. I
quite-
feel like
yeah.
bravery was a
Yeah.
quality. Bravery was a quality I feel like they were all born with. Just
I think
courage
so.
and bravery.
I think so.
In that generation, which is
Well, like Lucky in his book, he talks about when they flew the B-17 over to England, he basically had to fly it all by himself.
Mhm.
He did.
He did.
It's just
did.
how they were. And of course, that quality of individual is who would go into those services. You know, if you didn't want to do that, you certainly wouldn't have done that. But yes, they're very, very disciplined and very brave and confident in their own abilities. And and she was not afraid to be herself and to be different. So she wouldn't have been afraid to be the only pilot in West Des Moines, Iowa.
Yeah.
And she's just a very confident person, but not braggadocious, if that's a word. And she wouldn't talk about herself very much unless you asked. She's a very quiet, very patient person.
Yeah. Would you go to reunions with your mum and your dad? Like, would you all go as a family, or was it more of an adult sort of situation?
When we would what, Winnie?
Sorry, when they would go to their reunions, would you go with them, or would it be like just an adults only
Well, at
situation?
first, when they first started going was probably the early 80s. Like Dad didn't even know there was a 100th Bomb Group, a foundation, until he heard from somebody or got some sort of notification. And then they started going to his, and that would have been probably late 70s, early 80s.
Mhm.
And then Mom, her WASP reunions, I guess, were probably started about that time. And so they always went together for both sides, the men and the women. And then one time, about the early 90s, one of the guys in the 100th Bomb Group brought his family. I don't know if it was Lucky or who it was, but somebody had brought his family, and Dad never thought about it. And I thought, oh, wow, this is a great idea. Let's take the kids. So then we started going, and then our spouses started going. And then we're continuing going. My husband and I, my brother went to the 100th with his wife in New Orleans this past May. And then Rod and I went there also. But then we also went to Mom's WASP reunion at April, I think it was in Texas. And that was neat. But it's neat to see all the people, because now, especially with the 100th, it's very organized. And we all know each other, all our generation, we're all friends. And that's a neat thing, you know, and I
really
hope it can
sweet.
keep going, you know, through another generation at least.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of our generation's kids who are attending and are very interested. So who's to say? It very could be.
Yeah.
For sure.
But so, yes, we started going then as a family, and we went a lot as a family.
That's really great.
I
love that.
would, Gabby and I would love, even though we are having this episode about your mother, we would love to know about your father as well.
Oh, yeah.
And he flew with the 100th, and we would love to, you know, any stories you have of him while we're here, we would love to hear about as well.
Yeah, well, Dad, I was very close to Dad. And of course, Dad moved here 7 years before he passed. You know, he passed at 101 and 5 days on July 14, 2024. And he was completely with it to the end. In fact, he was lecturing to somebody the last few days. He was lecturing, you know how they kind of go in and out between two worlds. When I say he was completely with it, he was. But there would be times when he would be lecturing to no one in particular. Obviously, he was lecturing to somebody. And my friend came to visit and she said, "Oh, Eloise, he's smart to the end." But but Dad just was always so warm and I don't want to say overshadowed Mom, because Mom had a very quiet sense of, you always knew who she was. But Dad was more like me. I should say I'm more like Dad. More outgoing, easy to converse with people. He was always very interested in other people and their stories, and liked to tell his own stories. And with his book, he an Eighth Air Force combat diary, he tells a lot of stories, and there were a lot of funny things that he would tell. What I did notice, and I think this is really typical with the guys, and what I hear from other children of the 100th Bomb Group guys, is they tend to tell the funny things. They didn't talk so much about flying and seeing all their friends going down around them. It was very, very dangerous work, as we all know. And but Dad had a great faith in God, and so he knew he was going to be okay. In fact, at one point, he heard a voice say to him on one of their rough missions, very, very early in his missions, he heard a voice say, "I will take care of you."
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So,
That's incredible.
that he had more confidence than after that. Not that now Dad was also a very confident thing. That's what Mom
Yeah.
loved about him when she met him. I remember her saying she loved his enthusiasm and his go get itness, whatever you call it, and his confidence. And he was 8.5 years younger than Mom. So he was 20 years old when she met him. And she was, basically 30, 29. And just, you wonder how that works. And I asked Mom, I said, "How did you marry a guy who was so young compared?" And she said, "Well, the war really matured these guys and what they had been through."
Yeah.
So,
The letters that she writes to her parents right after she has met him, where he's a little young for me, but I like him. And then she's trying to decide between him and someone else, and she's going on different dates with all these people. And then there's one where she finally makes it official with your father, and then the next picture is them getting married, and it's one of my favorite pictures in the whole book because they
you know,
look so happy and so sweet. I love it.
it's interesting because they met on May 4, 1944, and
Mhm.
they then married on July 9, 1945. They were apart for most
Yeah.
of that time, and they
Yeah.
would write letters, and it would take 3 weeks to get the letters back and forth. And today it's instantaneous. The kids are on the phone and instant
Yeah.
communication.
Mhm.
But they didn't see each other more than maybe 3 months of that entire time. I
Yeah.
don't know how you could marry somebody like that, but times were different. We can't
Yeah.
compare our lives now with that. Very, very different times.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, she knew, and that kind of thing. She just knew
Mhm.
he was the guy.
When you
And they
know,
were
Yeah.
you
married for
know.
63 years.
Yeah, which is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And they
Yeah.
live such a full and happy life. I love towards the end of the book, your mother has obviously the letters stop after she has returned from flying, and it goes to what happened afterwards. And it's just this long list of all these
Oh, yeah.
things. We moved here and we went here, and John went back to school, and I did that. Gabby
Yeah.
and I were going through like, did this woman ever sit down? Did she ever stop?
Well,
It's
I think
wonderful.
one thing is, they were young when they came out, so they had their entire lives to live.
Yeah.
Oh,
Mom
for
was
sure.
94
Yeah.
when she died. And so she had another 60 years to live,
Yeah.
65 years to live. And Dad, of course, died at 101. And he got out of the service at 21. So he had 80 years of life. So, when you put it in that perspective, but yes, they were all, besides the amount of years that went by, they were very busy people, and they were both professional people who just, were working very hard to get their careers going, or to continue their careers, or to advance. And they were just all smart,
Yeah.
dedicated individuals, and wanted to make the world a better place. which is great.
Did your mum return to school, or did she just play
Yeah,
music
she
and
did.
stay home with you guys?
Yeah, when Dad was at Michigan for the 3 years right after they got married, she went and got a master's degree in, excuse me, in music. So she went to school also at the same time. Then when they moved to Boston, then she was working in the Harvard Coop with a bookstore while Dad was in school. And
Okay.
uh, they just were very easygoing, so they just, if and very flexible. So, if somebody
Yeah.
needed to go to work, they just found a job and did it, and I think that's also very typical of that generation, called the greatest
Yeah.
generation. They
Oh,
really were.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They just got on with it after being so willing to fight in this war.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
afterwards, they just got on with it, and they didn't let it
They weren't
they didn't let
self-absorbed
it
at all.
stop them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were not the important ones, in their
Yeah.
minds. And they did just get going. If they needed something, they went and got it.
Yeah.
I remember finding a diary of my parents, a financial diary, like a booklet that this is how
Yeah.
much we have to spend this month, and this is what we had. And every Tuesday they would get a Pepperidge Farm loaf of bread. That was their thing. And then in
Oh, that's
Boston,
sweet.
they actually subscribed to the Boston Symphony when they were in Boston, went every single Saturday night. And somehow they just put their money to that, and the things that they wanted to do. And of course, they sat in the cheapest seats way up at the top, which, they love to do. And then, of course, we started coming along, but they still continued their Boston Symphony subscription. That was very
That's very
important to
sweet.
Mom.
Yeah.
And if it was important to Mom, Dad would do it. Of course, they were both working
Yeah.
and, little Dad was in school. I mean, and Mom was working at the Harvard Coop. That's
Mm.
not big money, but
But they,
but they're
they
both,
did what they had to do to squeeze by. That's what that generation
yeah,
would do. They
yeah, and
just,
extremely intelligent people, which is why they did so well. And then it always surprised me initially. It surprised me that they wrote the books, because that takes a tremendous amount of energy, and they self-published them, so they paid for every single
Yeah.
thing, and they
right.
never got a dime off the books. Dad's books all go to the Hundredth Mom Group, and Mom's groups went to the WASP Museum, or a WASP before the WASP Museum started.
Mhm.
They would go to a WASP organization, and just they were very unselfish people, and just wanted to share their story because they felt it was so important for young people to know. And I asked Dad why he wrote his book, and he said, so that you guys would know what was going on and what we had
Mm.
gone through, because he never really talked about it like I said
Yeah.
earlier, he talked about the funny things that would happen,
Yeah.
but there were some very serious things that
Okay.
happened.
Did they agree to write the books at the same time, or did one go first and then the other followed suit because they saw the other writing?
Well, Dad wrote his first, and then um, found a box of Mom's letters, the letters, right, that are the things, and thought this would be a great book. And so they compiled the letters, and they didn't want any editing of either Dad's diary, because it's a diary, you can't edit a diary.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling the editor he spelled Ghent, Belgium wrong in his diary, and the woman wanted to correct the spelling, and he said, no, it's a diary, you can't correct that. And then Mom's letters, same thing, it's a diary just in forms of letters.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I thought was interesting about Dad's book, kind of how that started, like he found Mom's letters, and that's how that started. But Dad's mom had given him a little spiral notebook, maybe, 5 by 4, one of those small spiral notebooks with the spiral along the top. And she had been a writer, and she gave him the book before he went overseas and said, just write your impressions. That's all she said.
Yeah.
And so this is how his book then was based on this notebook. And he would write at the 60th, and no, that was later. When he wrote the book, he wrote the No, it was 60 years later because he had a lot of photos. There were photojournalists that went along with him on the missions, which shocks me. I
Yeah.
didn't realize they were embedded at that point, and that's where all those photos come from. But he had up in the corner, he would have for the International Herald Tribune, they would write what had happened every day on all three fronts, Africa, Europe, Pacific, war fronts. And he would have that there, and then had his briefing notes, and that's what he put in his notebook. Were the briefing notes at 3 o'clock in the morning? They had briefing, and you're going to fly to here today. You're going to be at such a altitude, blah blah blah. Very detailed notes of what their job was that day. And then he came back, and this is what he wrote in his notebook also, right after his mission. He wrote down his impression of what happened at that, not his impression of it, but what happened during the mission. And these guys came back and they were absolutely exhausted and they were cold and they were hungry and all that. Dad had the discipline, and both my parents were extremely disciplined, to sit down and write that right while it was fresh, because he knew if he ate, he'd just go right to bed, and then the next day was another mission and it would be lost. So he wrote that down, and then 60 years later wrote impression of 60 years later. And that's kind of how the book came about. In Mom's book, which came second, Dad had found this box of letters and thought this would be a great book. And then he wanted to sell the two as a unit, like as a love story.
Yeah.
And so they're always kind of marketed together, but people typically buy them separately, or they'll buy them together. But it's fun to watch Dad. So they would do a lot of book signings, both of them. And they, people were always very interested. They'd come up, and Dad would spend a lot of time with the book signings and explain how he put the book together. And I could frankly do Dad's book signings now if they wanted me to with the 100th, because I've heard what he would say to the people, and the people were so interested in him. But it was his personality that drew people to that too. And that's why they did a lot of book signings, sold a lot of books, which was neat.
It's very sweet. I
That's
love
great.
that.
I love that
Donated
the
all the money.
proceeds will go to, like, if you buy your dad's through the 100th Bomb Group, the proceeds go to the foundation. Your mom's will go
Yeah,
to
to the WASP Museum.
Museum.
Mhm.
Ahead of there being a WASP Museum back in the late 60s, early 70s, I know that the WASP had it was the Order of the Fiffinella was their organization.
Yeah.
Was your mom part of that? Because I know that was the order of women that really took up the charge to fight for their militarization, right? For their veterans benefits and post-war. Was your mom involved in the fight directly? Was she kind of, I'm here, but I'm going to support you? Or, was she in DC at all for that? Because that's always a story about these women that just blows my mind, that years later, they put their uniforms back on and they took up their fight again.
Mhm.
And it just shows how strong they were. So I'm just, I'm always genuinely curious who was there and the pieces of the
It's
puzzle.
interesting you say that, Gabby, because I've read a couple things about the Vietnam women. And they did the same thing, to get their Vietnam. I'll get back to your question, but they did the same thing. They had to fight, like, to get the women, the Vietnam War Women's Memorial in D.C. Diane Evans Carlson, who did that, and she also wrote a wonderful book. She's a local woman. That's how I know this. She was a nurse in Vietnam War, and for 10 years she would face these committees of these enormously powerful men, all men of course, and fight her way. Mom did not do that. Mom was quietly supporting from behind, which would be very much her personality. She was just really happy to put in the service. She wanted to fly. She wanted to support her country. She was very patriotic. But afterwards, she was more a quiet supporter, and I'm sure very financially involved in that. Whatever was needed, she would have supplied. But no, she knew those women very well who were doing that, and felt that they also didn't need another body. They had enough doing it, and she didn't have the personality to go speak out like they had to do that. But she did. I went to DC to pick up her gold medal, a congressional gold medal. That was a neat experience.
Oh, wow.
And they hand it to you. It's very.
That's so great.
she had just passed when that happened. She knew,
Yeah.
I can't remember if she knew that was going to happen, but she was able to have a flag on her coffin. We made sure that she had that. And of course, Dad's funeral, he went through the whole military, everything, the taps and the
Yeah.
gun salute and the flag and all that, you know. They
Yeah.
didn't have a flyover. I didn't know to ask for that, but I think he wasn't high enough ranked to have a flyover.
Mm.
But he would have loved that. He never knew we were going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I'm kind of
Oh,
messing it up for you guys in that
no,
I'm talking
you're
about
No,
mom
fine.
and dad kind of they
No,
overlap so
that's
much like that.
exactly
no, that's
what we want to do.
Well, you wanted to know how dad how that my parents met each other. And it was interesting. It was May 4, 1944, which was dad's mother's birthday, come to think of it. And they were both stationed in Las Vegas. Dad was there for B-17 school. Mom was there. That was her first assignment, first and only, I think, assignment with the WASP. And she was going to be teaching instrument flying, and she was going to be, she took up, the guys would come back and say, there's something wrong with this airplane. So this is where it freaks me out about my mom. There was something wrong with this airplane. So she would take it up to figure out what was wrong.
Yeah.
I never in my wildest dreams would do that.
Mm.
But
again,
so
it goes
that's,
back to their bravery.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Would you get on a plane at the Delta terminal if they said there's something wrong with it? So, get on. We're gonna take it up and try to figure it out.
And see what
No,
happens. Yeah, no, thank you.
you
Absolutely
figure it
not.
out, and then you tell me it's safe to get on. Then I'll
Then
get
I'll get
on.
on.
Yeah, there's just no way.
There's
And
no
so that's
way.
what she was doing. So it was his first day in Las Vegas, and he was sitting in the officers club, and she walked into the officers club with a record under her hand. Remember Winnie, how you were talking about she would
Yeah.
take records, wanted to take records to play for her friends and for her. And I guess there was a record player in the officers club in some back room. Like, how would they think to do that? But I'm not, that's just what they did. And so she was walking through and he saw this woman, beautiful woman walking through and noticed she was wearing wings. And he thought, "Ooh, who's this?" So of course he had to
Where did
introduce
she come
himself to,
from?
because Dad, of course, is not shy. And
Mm.
went up and introduced himself. And then he asked if he could, uh, they were talking, and she said she was going back to listen to a Debussy record, a French impressionist composer. And he said, "Oh, I love Debussy," but he had no idea who Debussy was. But
Smooth, John.
you know,
Oh my gosh.
and so she said,
That's very clever.
would you like to listen? That's how she would talk. And would you care to join me to listen? Something like that. And of course he said yes. And I don't know how much listening they did, but so they started, dating and having a grand old time. And then they double date with another WASP and another B-17 guy. And so there were a lot of those couples of B-17 and WASP guys.
Yeah.
And they kept contact with these other couples for many, many years afterwards. And so that's how they met. And then they were continued to date. And as you were saying, Winnie, she was seeing some other guy at the same time. And she chose Dad.
Good.
And
She
we're
was just
very
playing
glad
the
that she
field.
did.
We're very glad. When did your dad go overseas? 44?
Say, when did he go? And then what did you say?
He went overseas in 44, correct?
Yes, he went
Yeah.
shortly after he met Mom because he was in B-17 school. And what's interesting to me, I'll get back to your question, is these guys, the reason they needed the WASP is they needed people to train them because the guys were, 18, 20 years old. And all the men who would normally be training them for the military were overseas fighting. And so the WASP then were started to train these guys, which is what they did. And so now where was I going with this? What was your question, Winnie? I'm sorry.
Your dad
Dad
going
went over
overseas.
shortly. That's right. So Dad, then he trained on the B-17 and went to a couple other places after that for further training. But it was not very many months later. But was it April he went over? No, it couldn't have been. That would have been almost a year later. I should know this. you guys would know this from, you've got the book sitting in front of you, so you can fill it in when you do the thing. He went over, they were together a month, I know that,
Yeah.
in May when they met. And then he was gone until he came back, just before I know he came back to the States in April before they got married in July, but he was at getting debriefings and going all these different places.
Right, right.
And they didn't see each other till about maybe 2 weeks before the wedding. And he
Yeah.
came to West Des Moines and they then got married.
Yeah.
They went down and got the ring from her uncle, who was a jeweler. And Dad
I love
proposed
that.
at the Waterworks Park in West Des Moines.
Oh.
And so it amazes me they just didn't see each other, and they had all these letters. And can you imagine writing a letter to someone you don't even know is still alive? And she wouldn't
Yeah,
have
that
been
must have been
told that anything
incredibly,
happened.
yeah,
Yeah, she wasn't immediate family at that point.
Right.
yeah.
So, you'd hope that
It's
his
daunting.
family would have
Yeah.
told her if something happened. I'm sure they would have.
Yeah, you would hope. Yeah, it must have been incredibly daunting to write down everything that you've been doing with the possibility
Yeah.
that the person you're writing to is isn't there anymore. But and it
No.
always took such a long time to get there. It took 3 weeks,
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
it's unbelievable.
crazy.
One thing I find kind of interesting is after they got married, um, they got married in July, and then school didn't start till September in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at University of Michigan. So they of course had nothing, and they lived with his parents in Royal Oak, Michigan, which is a northern suburb now. It was out in the country at the time, but a northern suburb of Detroit. And mom's family was very different than dad's family. Dad's family, they lived kind of in a tar paper shack. They had 5 kids. They were extremely poor. And his dad worked, as they say, at Ford's. That's how they say it. But at that time they could be fired. Henry Ford would walk down the line and just fire you for really anything. That's actually how the union started, is because they had to have some support.
Yeah.
And so they lived with the family, and dad's family, they were all really neat people, very highly educated. Grandma insisted on education for all 5 children, and all 5 of them have PhDs. And so education was very, very important. But where they lived was this absolute tar paper shack. And mom, I'm sure, was quite shocked. Dad always thought she was probably quite shocked. But of course, she never said anything about it because it wouldn't be nice. It wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah.
And they would feel bad. But she went along with the ride. And then, when they could have their own apartment in Ann Arbor when school started, that was a different deal.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
I'm trying to. So, Dad, you were wondering about Dad's upbringing and how he became a pilot in time in England.
Yes.
Again, that, as I was mentioned my grandmother a minute ago, Grandma Clark, Dad's mom, insisted, and his father too, insisted on excellence, just like my mom's parents did. And of course, they were all incredibly bright, intelligent kids in Dad's family, and it did very, very well in school. And it was just, they again saw these planes flying over. He and his brothers were very interested in aircraft. They built a ton of models of every single airplane that could be, and won all sorts of contests flying them. But they were just little, balsa wood models of stuff, and they just loved that. And they were all engineering oriented, the guys, and so they could get this stuff put together. They weren't necessarily from kits; they built them from scratch and fly them. And so Dad, became a pilot, and then did his stint, and then flew in the Michigan National Guard for several years after that. And then was concentrated on his academic career, which was quite spectacular.
Yeah, what was his PhD in? What did
Mechanical
he do?
engineering, mechanical
Wow.
engineering from MIT, and his area is heat transfer and thermodynamics, which is quite an academic thing. And he was
Yeah.
a researcher. He didn't do practical engineering like design. My brother was a practical engineer. but in mechanical engineering. But Dad was a theoretician and did tons of research. He was worked on the Nautilus with Rickover when the Nautilus submarine was first coming out. He was part of that crowd because Rickover would come up every Friday night about 9. He would arrive in Boston, and the team from MIT would work with him then for many hours, then all night, and then Rickover would go back to Washington. Admiral Rickover. Then he was very involved in the initial solar energy stuff from that was in the late 40s. You know, we think of solar energy as a fairly, at least I do, fairly recent phenomenon, but it's not. It went back, and he was involved in a lot of that at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So
Two
that whole heat
incredibly smart people.
it missed me, but they were both very, very bright. My
I
brother is
doubt that.
I very highly doubt that it missed
Well,
you.
I highly doubt that.
I think my brother got more of that than me.
No.
Brother would be
What
an
were you?
interesting interview for you. He would be talking more
Oh.
about the technical side of things if you're interested in that. 'Cause my brother is a pilot also. So he would understand all that side of them
Yeah.
much more than me. I know sort of the personality part. In fact, at Dad's celebration of life, my brother Dave talked about Dad's academic and that type of hardcore factual stuff.
Yeah.
I talked about Dad's character, which was more what I knew.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. But Dad's parents, back to his upbringing, Dad's parents were insisted on excellence in education, and they read to them constantly and had them read. And Grandma was quite an educated person herself, and insisted that the kids all read, and do very well in school. And Dad would talk about he was kind of a naughty boy. And in school, he would take somebody's pile of books and throw them down the hall in junior high. And the one of his teachers said, "John Clark, I just don't know what's going to come of you." And then the
Little did
principal
she
told
know.
Boys will be boys.
yes, and the principal at one point told his mom, "John is just a bad boy."
And I'm sure that carried on through his life. I bet he was
Oh
still a
my
little
God.
cheeky.
Yeah, he
In
was.
fact,
He was
there was a
fun.
picture. There was a picture that someone posted on Facebook through the 100th Bomb group, Facebook group. And it was your dad's in this lineup with Lucky and Rasmussen, and not all of them are looking at the camera, but your dad is, and he has the cheekiest little smile on his face. He's looking at the camera and he's just, "Hi!" It's so cute. I love it.
They're
It's
not paying
funny.
attention,
This
but I'm here.
little-
It's good.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah,
gonna
he's
say.
like, "I'm looking."
I was just gonna say, Gabby, he was probably the only one paying attention, and the only one that
Correct.
could hear, maybe.
I
But he
feel
always
like,
had a twinkle in his eye, and he was
yes,
so
that's what I was about to
funny
say.
and
Yeah.
very clever and always a quip. And he just
Mm.
people loved Dad, and he loved people. Like when he would go
Mm.
to the ER, the doctors loved him, and he was not afraid to ask them about their families and tell him about his, and they really appreciated that. And me being a physician, I know how that is when you have a patient that comes in as actually interested in you as a human being. You're
Yeah.
not some sort of creature with an MD after your name. You're actually a person with a family and a life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was very interested in other people, which made him very popular.
Mm. I love that. You can, in that particular picture, you can absolutely see that his character shone through so much.
Yes.
Even in the pictures of him younger that are featured in your mum's book, he's
Yeah.
still got that cheeky little.
Yeah.
I just kind of want to pinch his cheek a tiny little bit because he's so.
He's very
um,
cute, isn't he? Very handsome
yeah,
and very cute. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah. There's one
Yes.
particular one where they are looking at each other, and your mum's just slightly taller than him, and
Because she had her heels
that's
on, of
another one
course.
of my favorites because she had the heels
Yes.
on. I loved it. I love the book. I've read it twice now, and I'm so excited to read your dad's.
Yes.
Yeah. Dad's is
Yeah.
very interesting also. It's just,
Yeah.
a completely different thing, but you can see how they fell in love with each other because they had so many of the same interests. And they
Yes.
sort of air-minded generation, as Dad called it. It was very interesting people, and they're very interested in other people, so they could take in each other's world. And that
Yeah.
was really neat, and they tried to teach us to do that.
They
Well, let me
very
see
much
what else.
complemented each other.
Yes,
Yeah,
they did.
there's another cute picture of Dad at a more recent 100th Bomb Group reunion where he had on a flying hat and he's laughing. Just and I don't know where that picture is out there.
We'll
It's
find
he's
it.
sitting in
We'll
a chair.
figure it
Yeah.
out. We'll dig.
The
We'll find
hundredth,
it.
yeah, the 100th has, their every other year they have their big 100th reunion. And then every February they would have one in Palm Springs for the 418th Squadron. And they would all get together. And that's where we really got to know a lot of the people. And then when you get together in the big 100th, you know some
Yeah.
people. And that's neat. They haven't had a 418th for a while. And I think because the man who lived in one of the B-17 guys lived in Palm Springs. And he's either passed or is no longer able to organize the event. But those were fun too. And so we would see these people twice a year, every other
Right.
year, once a year at least.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Well,
It's
we're
nice
looking
that-
forward to seeing everybody at the next big 100th reunion.
Oh, are you guys going to come?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
wonderful.
We'll be there. We will.
Oh,
Very
that's
excited.
wonderful. I know they're deciding where it's going to be. Have you heard anything?
I'm hoping it's here because there is a Museum of Flight
Yes.
here in
They've
Seattle.
talked about Seattle. Yeah.
And I'm like, that makes things so much easier for me because I'd have to drive maybe 45 minutes to get there.
And poor
And
Gabby
that
has to
saves
fly
me.
across the country.
Oh no.
It's fine.
Well,
I'll pick her up from the airport.
I
I'll
love
get
a
in my
good
car.
trip. So you never have to twist my arm to get on a plane
To
and
go
go
anywhere.
You
I can't
never
remember.
have to.
You guys, I know, Winnie, you've been to Thorpe Abbott's. Gabby, have you been? I can't remember
I
from our
have been.
conversation.
I have been. I just went this past April on an 8th Air Force tour that was organized through a group called We Happy Few 506, which is created by one of the cast members from Band of Brothers. And he's created this entire tour group kind of family, and he does all different types of tours. So after Masters of the Air came out, he's done 2 of them now. 8th Air Force tours with trips to Thorpe Abbott's and different, Air Force related bases in the Cambridge area. So I got to go up in April, which was great. And like I said, you never have to twist my arm to get on a plane. I went by myself, and I only knew the people I was meeting over there through this community. And I said, you know what? We have family friends that live in the Essex area. So I was like, look, if push comes to shove and it's really, really bad, I'll go stay with them. But I got up and I went and I did it by myself, and I made friends that are going to last a lifetime on that trip. But
that's neat. That's wonderful.
To be on the grounds there to see it.
Yeah.
It really is like, I went back a second time with my family friends, and it was a Sunday and it was quiet. When you're there with the tour group, everybody's running around and everybody wants to see everything, and they're talking, and you want to get a minute with the actors from Masters of the Air that are there and kind of chat with them. But when I went back the second time, it was quiet. There was really nobody had gotten there yet for the day, and it was just the volunteers and me and my family. I just kind of took a minute to stand there and look at the control tower, and you really just feel it hit you, like the force of it, the weight of it, that this was once this busy airfield, and that planes were coming and going, and lives were changing, right? This is someplace where people's lives were changed for the good or the bad instantaneously. Or this is where somebody would step foot into a fort and leave the ground for the last time. It really hits you very hard, the weight of it all. And it's incredible to see how well preserved it is and how much care the museum volunteers take in preserving these memories and this moment in time that not a lot of people know about. It's
very
really
true.
Yeah.
And it
everybody
looks
knows about the Army and the Navy, but unless you know to go to these control towers and these airfields, there's
Yeah.
so many stories that are hidden in there that you can unearth. It's incredible.
I will say that I grew up relatively close to it, and
Mhm.
even I was not aware of it until quite late on. I knew that I grew up right by an airfield called Rougham Airfield, but I never connected the dots until extremely recently that Rougham Airfield was RAF Bury St Edmunds, where I grew up. It never connected that the people that I now speak about were literally on my doorstep in 1943. So I think a lot of it is missed education, because I grew up literally behind it and I didn't know until relatively recently. Unfortunately, it's not taught the way it should be, especially in schools that are surrounding the area.
Mhm.
So while I now see myself as lucky enough to have grown up beside it, and now I'm learning so much more, I'm very upset of all these years that I missed the opportunity to take it in, because I didn't know. It's not made obvious. No one ever really says anything. There's memorials now, but when I was growing up, there was nothing. There was maybe like a cross in the ground, or like a homemade memorial. There was never anything officially put there. I believe recently there was one put up at Rougham Airfield. I think, Gabby, you went to visit one while you were there.
They took us to
in
Rougham
the
as
spring.
well when I was there.
Yeah, and I grew up maybe like 30 minutes away from it, and I didn't know until Gabby said, I'm going to Rougham, and I'm like, I grew up literally on the doorstep. But you're not really
Do you
told.
think there's anything you could do, Winnie, to get something in the curriculum of the schools?
I'm hoping that
I
when
don't know how it works in England.
I'm hoping when I move back, Gabby and I have discussed sort of like a living history type thing, where we would go to these air bases and give talks about the people that were there and the women that were involved in the war. We have really fun plans to try and find a Clubmobile, and on the hour, every hour, we give talks to kids on field trips at the base. We have some very silly dreams, but that is what I would
I
like
think
to do.
that's a better way of doing it, of doing that and giving talks, because you're not going to be able to put something in the curriculum the more I think about that. But
No.
but to give talks, my parents used to go give duo talks, or dad would, sometimes they'd be individual, but they talked to school kids a lot, and dad would give all sorts of Memorial Day talks and Fourth of July talks and all sorts of things. So I think that's a really important to do. What when you're talking about the different air bases, I think there's a map in Dad's, sort of a hand-drawn map in Dad's book, of all the air bases that were around there.
Yeah.
There's just the American bases and then just the British bases,
Yeah.
and how many there were. And each
So
base had, what,
many.
1,000 planes, something like that. I can't imagine. And then, can you imagine the noise be? I mean, it would be
Yes.
24 hours a day, because the Brits flew at night and the Americans flew
Yep.
during the day. So it was 24 hours, and it would take hours for that whole bunch of planes to take off. And, squadron after squadron. It's very interesting to me. And,
As I
another thing,
was growing up as well, there was no, I grew up right by an RAF base. So
so that
even
was
as
still
I was
going
growing
on.
up, it was
Yeah.
still
Oh, yeah.
noise. There was plane
Yeah.
noise. There was mortar training noise. There was gun noise. So, I can sleep through anything. But yeah, it never stopped. And one of the things that I've read a lot about World War II and the Americans being in East Anglia was that they missed the constant noise after so many years of hearing the rumble of all of these planes.
Went
That they
back to their
said
farms.
it got too quiet, like
Mhm.
eerily quiet.
Mhm.
Which, now when I think back to where I used to live with my mother, it's eerily quiet. And if you think having all that noise for so many years, I think of myself walking down this specific lane near where I used to live, and so quiet. Where I grew up was so quiet. Apart from their plane noise occasionally, but yeah, very
Interesting.
eerily quiet. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say also about, you mentioned Masters of the Air, it reminded me of it. There's the last episode of Masters of the Air where they actually interview a lot of or several of the guys, and Dad is
Yeah.
interviewed in there, Lucky's interviewed in there,
Yeah.
several of them are, and people seem to have missed that when they were watching it, and I don't know how we found it, but it wasn't like the next week shown. You had to look for it.
I believe what happened was that they aired the final episode on Apple TV, and then directly after it, they added it as like a documentary, as like a
Yes.
partner to it.
The Bloody Hundredth documentary, yeah.
But I believe initially they put it under extras. They didn't add it as an episode. They put it under extras on Apple TV.
Yeah,
So you
that
had
makes
to
sense.
go
Yeah.
look for it. Yeah.
I watch it quite
for
often. I go back to that
Yeah, I watch
documentary
it
a
very
lot.
often.
It's a good, I mean, aside from being a good point of reference for a lot of the stuff that you and I do, Winnie, it's just it's a reminder too, right? That
Yeah.
like, Band of Brothers in the Pacific, Masters of the Air isn't just, handsome faces, flying planes in World War II, regalia.
It's not just a story. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just a story, it's a true story.
Yeah.
And
It really happened. It's history.
It's history. And the documentary serves to remind people that there were a lot of men not shown on the screen in the show, obviously for, timing purposes, and TV making is TV making, and I don't know all the ins and outs of it. But such is always the case. Here's a handful of men that we didn't show you on TV. Here's who they really are.
Yeah.
This is what you should be focusing on.
And they all
Sometimes
love
the plot
talking.
is missed. Yes.
Yeah, what surprises me is they all, they're so proud of their service, and I'm not surprised about that. But the fact that they enjoy talking about it, and the more I listened to Dad, and I was in on a lot of his interviews as when he was here for 7 years, because I either had to drive him there or was there helping out, when it was, he was an older guy, and I was interested for one, but it was just, he was so happy to talk about it, would answer any question, would elaborate. You ask him one question and he would answer for 45 minutes. I mean, the depth of knowledge that these guys, I'm thinking particularly my father, but Lucky and all these guys had was amazing, and their interest that stays to this day. And of course what's interesting is Dad talked about the war so much in his older years, his later years. His career was, 70 years of high-powered engineering stuff. But his year, basically, in the war, he talked about all the time. It was like that was the only thing he ever did. And, he would talk, if you asked about his career, of course, he'd talk about that. But he really was very interested in talking about the career. He was also talking about the war. He was also very interested in educating people about it, which is why he, like what you're talking about, of going and giving the talks at these places. That's what they did. They went out and talked a lot to school groups and groups of people, different groups, adult groups, war veterans, etc. It's interesting. I was so glad they wanted to share that. They didn't want that history lost.
It should be
which is what you're saying.
Yeah. It should be shared. It should be even in the curriculum in the States, even when I was a kid, and I'm going back when I was a kid, God, even high school history. I've been out of high school almost 20 years. I mean, the curriculum is, you get the basic, right? You get that, it was the Allies versus the Axis power, Hitler, and the big name that shows up in every book is Patton. Patton's Third Army. That's the one that they shove into every history book. And unless you make a college career out of history and you study it and you go for your master's, you're not learning the rest of it. Yeah. You're getting the basic, the core curriculum of the US is that it was, General Eisenhower, Patton's Third Army, and that Hitler was the bad guy. and that
Yeah.
Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. That's the basic four walls that you're getting in a history education in an American high school. It's not enough.
While you got Patton, I got Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So again,
Basically.
that's how we complement one another. You
Yeah.
teach me about that, and I teach you about
But
Churchill.
I'll be very honest. Growing up in school, I used to be like, oh my God, okay, we know, right? Like you'd get freshman year of high school, sophomore year, like, okay, we know, right? You know, Hitler was bad. Japan bombed
Hitler
Pearl
was the
Harbor.
bad guy,
Eventually
yeah.
you get it, right? It starts to click. Now as an adult, I'm sitting here going, that's not enough. Like they're not giving these kids enough. These kids are going into the world not knowing the history at all.
That is so true. That is so true. Are you ladies ever coming to Minnesota?
Not that I know of, but I would
No,
like to.
But hey,
Please
you
let us
never know.
You never know.
Yes,
We
and
might
the
do a
same
little
if you
tour.
ever come to New York, if you ever come for a visit or anything, let me know. Be
Yeah, I
happy
love
to
that. They
meet
were.
for a
Same to
cocktail
me
or a cup
here.
of coffee or something. It'd be great to see.
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful time together, ladies.
Yes,
And,
thank you so much.
thank
We
you.
are so appreciative of hearing so many wonderful stories of your mom and your dad. And for our listeners, don't forget, if you haven't read Dear Mother and Daddy by Marie Mountain Clark, you can pick that up. You can pick that up through the 100th Bomb Group as well. But we do ask that you buy that one through the WASP organizations so that the money goes to the WASP Museum, and that we ask if you buy John's book that you buy it through the 100th Bomb Group so that that goes to the 100th Bomb Group Foundation as well. We are here at this podcast avid supporters of the WASP and the 100th Bomb Group. So if you can help in any way, we ask that you do so. And if you haven't read them, we also recommend very highly that you do. And
Yes.
thank you again, Eloise, for coming to join us. We had a wonderful time.
We did.
Thank you. I
An
had a
excellent
wonderful time too. Thank you so
Good.
much. Really
We're so
appreciate
glad.
it. And I appreciate you getting the word out about all these people, our parents' generation. It's very important. Thank you for that.
We're happy
And
to
it's very important.
happy to do
very
it.
important to us to carry it on.
Yes, absolutely.
We're very happy to do so.
Yes.
Great. And so nice to meet you both.
You as
You too.
well. And to all our listeners at home, we will catch you guys the next time the Clubmobile comes around.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.